Hello everyone, it's Ben from GrapplingInsider.com. Today I am happy to be joined by one of the world's top black belt competitors. She's a multiple-time no-gi world champion, multiple-time no-gi pans champion, Polaris champion, who's #1 champion, probably ADCC trials champion, long time ago. Elisabeth Clay, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me on.
Of course. So I mentioned no-gi pans, right? I'm having you on. I'm excited to talk to you because you just won double gold at no-gi pans, which is a super impressive feat in its own right. So congratulations on that. But really, the story here is that you just became a mom for the first time, like what, 2.5 months ago.
Yeah.
So that in and of itself is an incredible feat. But I guess first of all, congratulations. But second of all, I want to know just how do you rate your performance? Like, how do you feel now? It's been about a week since you won double gold.
Honestly, like as far as coming back as fast as I did after having a baby, I feel like I did really good. I definitely like I can go back and look at it and be like, oh, like my guard pulls are definitely like a little slow and off. It's definitely not like an issue I normally have. I feel like my reaction time was a little bit slower than it would have been pre-pregnancy, but also 2.5 months after giving birth, I can't exactly be mad about how I did.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, how much of that do you chalk up to the physical toll of pregnancy and giving birth versus just, you haven't competed, you're somebody who competes a ton. How much of that was kind of like ring rust, so to speak?
I would say most of it's just from not competing for almost a year, just because you get the timing's a little bit off. Even if you're pulling guard in training, like it's not the same thing as timing it to pull in a competition, and then having almost a year off of doing that. Like that'll mess it up right there.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. I'm a relatively new parent myself. My wife had a baby 14, 15 months ago at this point. So to me, it's crazy. Like being that close to the situation, it's kind of insane. How are you feeling like physically after competing? Obviously, still training. How are you how are you recovery wise after competing? Was it harder on your body than you expected? Anything like that?
Yeah, it was definitely harder on my body than I expected afterwards. Like I was never somebody that got super sore after competing. Once I hit into black belt, I would get a little bit sore after competing, but never anything bad. But this one, I was like, man, like my body's definitely not used to this anymore.
That's insane. So tell me, actually, first of all, is it Danilo Jr.? What do you call him? Junior or anything like that?
So usually call him Danilino, so it's like little Danilo.
Okay, perfect. How's he doing? I know at this age they're basically little potatoes, but like anything fun going on?
He actually just started like he would laugh in his sleep, but now he started laughing while he's awake. He actually laughed himself awake this morning.
Oh, that's adorable. I love it. Any like social smiles? Can you make him smile? Can you tickle him? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, he smiles a ton. Just a super happy baby. Honestly, like as far as competing goes, people were kind of asking how like doing it with the baby. First of all, my husband was there, which he was competing as well, but it's a lifesaver being able to like switch off back and forth. And then honestly, like he's the easiest baby ever. I constantly like tell my husband, look over, I'm like, I don't know how we got this lucky. I'd be scared to have another one, that they would just be normal and I wouldn't be able to handle it because like he slept almost the entire competition. He slept through all of our matches except for the absolute finals. He was asleep.
That's crazy. He didn't even care. He was not impressed, probably.
No, not at all. He woke up to eat, and then as soon as he would eat, he would go back to sleep. Like he didn't care at all. Noise didn't bother him. Nothing. He's like, oh, there's sounds. Okay, I'm going back to sleep now.
That's crazy. So, I know you say he's the easiest baby, but obviously there's challenges, right? He's sleep, different tolls. Like, what are the biggest challenges that you experienced competing with him for the first time?
Honestly, my biggest concern going in was like the lack of sleep, especially like 3 4 days before. He was not letting me sleep a ton at all, like either one of us, honestly. And I was like, man, like what's gonna happen if we go in like the night before and he doesn't let us sleep at all? Like, I mean, there's not much you can do. Anybody that's a parent knows like you're tired, you get up, you go to work if you have to do that, whatever. But that was my biggest concern. And thankfully, like he was super good. He actually gave some of the best sleep I've had. Like he slept really well. I think with the travel and everything, he was probably a little tired, so he slept a little bit more, which ended up working out well for us and like was able to get some more sleep. Um, I think the biggest challenge was just like more so there were so many like firsts with it. Like this was our first flight with him. This was my first competition back. This was like there were just so many firsts. It's part of why I competed in heavyweight because I was on weight for medium heavy, which is still one weight class above my normal weight class. But I was like, I don't want to even be just on weight. Like I don't want to have to think about it at all. I'm still breastfeeding. He's not formula fed or even like bottle fed. Like he's pretty much just breastfeeding. So I'm breastfeeding, competing for the first time. I'm doing the absolute. My husband's competing. So there were just a ton of like firsts going into it that I think made it more stressful. And thankfully, like everything worked out. But it was definitely like stressful going into it. Like, what happens if he just all of a sudden gets hungry right before I have to compete? And anybody that knows, like, kids will get, it'll be the most random thing. They don't want to eat, don't want to eat, don't want to eat. And then right before you have to do something, they're starving.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Tell me about like compare your mindset now, because parenthood is crazy. You just mentioned all these things that you're as a kind of constantly worrying and thinking about all these things that you just mentioned versus before going into a competition. I have to imagine you're mostly just thinking about the competition. Were you able like compare your mindset now as a mother to before? What's up, everyone? Chances are, if you're tuning into this interview, you probably train in jiu-jitsu, whether it's in the gi, no gi, or both. I've been training for about 13 long years now myself, and when it comes to the gear that I like to use, I personally recommend Rev Gear. They have a premium gi that I love. They have an ultralight competition gi. They have grappling shorts. They even have rash guards that are pretty understated in design, but still really sharp looking. High quality gym bags, even backpacks that can hold multiple gis. So basically just like everything you would need for BJJ training. The best part for me personally is that nothing on that site will break the bank. We're not talking $75, $80 rash guards or $250 gis. Everything that RevGear offers is super reasonably priced, which personally I love. To make it even sweeter, RevGear is offering a 10% discount on every purchase made on revgear.com when you use the promo code INSIDER10 at checkout. That's INSIDER10 for 10% off anything and everything you buy on the site. I will also drop a link in the video description below. Again, I cannot recommend their stuff enough. Everything I have from RevGear fits well, it's solidly made, and in my experience, holds up great in the long run. Again, head over to revgear.com. That's REVGEAR.com. Use the promo code INSIDER10 for 10% off any purchase made and get some quality gear at a phenomenal price. Now, back to the interview.
So I feel like I was able to balance it pretty well, especially like once I got into the bullpen. So beforehand, I'd be like, hey, his diaper's good. Make sure he's fed since he's breastfed, make sure he's fed. And then once I go down, I'm like, hey, tell my husband, like, you've got a packet of milk. If he gets hungry, you can feed him. If you need to hand him down in the bullpen, like I'm okay to feed him while I'm in the bullpen as long as they're not calling me up. But luckily, like for me, I could stop and think about it and be like, hey, even if he's upset, my matches are only 10 minutes. So it's only actually the 10 minutes that if he is upset, that he's going to be upset during it. Like I can do something before and after, but thankfully, like he was okay. So as soon as I went into the bullpen, I pretty much could just like hone into like competing and think about that. And also for me, like it's not necessarily a bad thing that I'm distracted beforehand because it kind of keeps me out of my head a little bit. I'm not getting a huge adrenaline dump because I'm not even thinking about necessarily competing too much, like taking care of my baby until it's about time for me to go down to the bullpen. And then I can just kind of get in, think about what I need to for the competition and just focus on the competition. So I feel like there's like kind of like a split that happens, at least for me. And that I was concerned going in. I was like, how is the split gonna happen? Am I gonna be like nervous the whole time, thinking about, how he's doing and not even worried about competing? But honestly, like once I got into the bullpen, and was going in, I was pretty much able to just think about the competition.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I've heard other parents talk about other parent athletes talk about, I compete better because before I would stress about losing and what that means to my life, but now it's like, well, I'm just worried that is his diaper clean? Like, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you can just focus on the task at hand. I don't know. Do you feel like, I guess, how did you feel out there? I know it's kind of a vague question, but like mindset wise, did it feel just like business as usual? Did you feel better, worse, kind of mentality wise competing?
Honestly, it pretty much just felt like business as usual. It felt so good to get back out there. The hardest thing for me during pregnancy, because like I was still training and everything, was not being able to compete. And like I was still at all these major competitions. I was still at Brazilian Nationals. I was still at Worlds. I was still at Pans. And I wasn't competing. And that was the hardest part for me, was not competing, especially like being at Worlds, not being able to compete, because that's one of the titles I don't have, right? Like I've won IBJJF, gi pans, I've won no gi pan, like all of those ones, but I haven't won gi Worlds yet. And so being there at Worlds was hard. So then being able to like go in and compete and actually do what I like to do was really nice. And then it was good. Like I would compete once I was done for like that section, because I do open and weight. Like I would be done, would go up, take care of baby, and then kind of just switch off with my husband. And it honestly, like I felt great being out there, and it was everything that I hoped that it would have been.
I love it. I guess I wanted to talk to you about this later in the interview, but like you talked about going to Brasileiros, Pans, all these other tournaments that you can't compete in. Are you somebody that really gets under your skin? Like, oh, I wish I know I should be out there. I could beat this girl, that girl, things like that. Or are you able to just kind of take it in and enjoy it for the moment?
So it pans, like I felt fine being there, not competing. I think it helped that I'd won it, like that I'd won it the previous year. So it was kind of one of those that, like, yeah, don't get me wrong. Of course, I wanted to be competing, but like I felt okay not competing. It's one that I've won, and so it's not something that I'm like on chasing this title, you know. Brazilian Nationals, like it was a little weird being there and not competing, especially because my husband, he was in the quarters. And so like I was down there as a coach, but I've never been in the bullpen, not the one competing. So that part was a little weird, because I was down there like as a coach, and like I was getting the adrenaline dump, like I was competing, even though I wasn't, but it was just because that's what I'm so used to when I'm down there. You get the adrenaline dump because you're competing. And my body just kind of didn't know any different being down there, not being the one competing. And I remember afterwards being like, dude, like I was I was like 20, I want to say like 27 weeks pregnant or 25 weeks pregnant or something like that. The adrenaline dump was so bad. I was getting like Braxton Hicks while it was happening. And I was like, dude, this is not good. But like being there was different, especially because I was down in the bullpen. Worlds was rough. Worlds was the only one that I would say that was like really rough to be at and not be competing. The other ones I was okay not competing. Like I was able to just kind of watch and it be like kind of casual, but Worlds was hard. Worlds was the one, like we would get back to the Airbnb at night and I'd be like, damn, like I'm not competing. Like this bothers me, like sitting there seeing it, like I'm missing Worlds. Um, that was the one that really got to me, but I wouldn't say that any of the other ones got to me, which I was surprised about. I really thought that every single competition I went to was going to be really hard for me. But it wasn't. Only Worlds.
I could imagine. I'm glad you talk about it. I think, just speaking like I said, from my wife's perspective, a lot of people, they talk about pregnancy is great, and it is great. I'm sure you enjoyed it, but they talk
Yeah.
about, oh, it's the most beautiful time of my life. But there's things that you have to miss out on that I'm sure are difficult, right? Um, I guess tell me about like let's talk about you. One thing I really appreciate you is you were open while you were pregnant about this is how I'm training. I'm not giving advice to anybody, but like this is my experience. I guess what was your mindset going into pregnancy with continuing training jujitsu? Like what were your goals? Kind of how did you approach it?
So my goal, even way before, like when me and my husband first met, I told him I was like, hey, like if we ever have kids, like I want kids, I'm gonna train while I'm pregnant. Like if that's not something you're okay with, should probably talk about it now, because it's going to happen. And obviously, I think things like that are better to talk about before you're in it, because then you're way more like both of you are more emotional. There's a baby. So I always knew from the beginning that my goal was to train through pregnancy, but I think like people's levels of training is very different. Like some people go to training and they say they train their entire pregnancy and they were just drilling or doing warms, and there's nothing wrong with that. Everybody's level is different, and what you're comfortable with is different, and what you're just physically capable of is very different. But my goal always going in was to train as normal as possible, like still doing rounds, still I never asked any of my training partners to adjust anything. And obviously, like as I started getting further along, I think they kind of naturally adjusted. But nobody even knew I was pregnant until I was like 17, 18 weeks. When I announced it on Instagram, is when everybody else found out except for my professor, and I told him the week before just because I didn't want him to find out on Instagram. And the only reason I even announced was because of PANS and the fact they announced that they were testing. And I was like, well, if I all of a sudden like pop out and say that I'm not doing PANS because I'm hurt, everybody's gonna think it's because I'm on steroids because they're testing now. And I'm not on steroids. I was pregnant, so I obviously like I can't go and do it. But I was like, everybody, if you announce the week before a major competition that just announced that they're testing, everyone assumes you're on steroids because 90% of the time that's why you dropped out. And I was like, well, like I have to actually announce why I'm not competing because otherwise people are just gonna jump to the conclusion that I'm dropping out because I'm on steroids because they're testing. And so I had to like, so I told my professor, I was like, I think I was 17 weeks and I think I announced it at like 18, 19 weeks, something like that. Um, and so nobody even knew. I was still training like normal. I didn't ask my training partners to adjust. And I think that's something that I was able to do because of the level that I'm at. I don't think that that's necessarily something that everybody should do. And I think that that was one thing I get asked about. They're like, oh, like you were still rolling like 30, 35 weeks into your pregnancy. I'm like, yeah, but also like one, I'm training with people that are predictable because why is the white belt hurt you? Because they're doing crazy stuff and you can't predict what they're gonna do. As you start going up, like there might be five, six, seven things that they could do, but it's predictable in the fact that they're gonna do the correct thing. And so I know that these are the things that I have to worry about, and I know each adjustment that I have to make to keep myself safe and the baby safe while I'm training. Like as people are passing, if I okay, this type of pass, people most of the time come straight on knee on belly. I'm already turning so that their knee is on my hip instead of on my stomach. And though like those were adjustments I made from the very beginning, and that's why I felt comfortable not telling people. Because I felt like I could keep myself safe and I didn't want to be somebody because I was still training with pro athletes. I wasn't gonna ask them to adjust when they still have competitions. And even in my head, I was like when I was training before pants, before I even announced, I was like, hey, like this is probably gonna be like my last one that I'm going to be able to train with the pro athletes because I'm probably going to get big enough or I won't be able to do well enough to make it worth it for them that I'm going to start pulling away. And I'm not going to do that to people whose job this is. Like that's not fair. And honestly, I ended up surprising myself as with how much I was able to train as far as like I was still training with them for Worlds. And so for Worlds, that was in June and I had the baby the end of August. So I was third trimester, and then we went to Brazil, took a trip to Brazil. I was training the whole time I was there. Um, but I honestly like my goal the whole time was just to train as much as I could, as far along as I could. And I ended up even surprising myself with as much as I was able to do training wise. But I think some people hear that and then they get upset that they're not able to do as much. It varies person to person. And like I was able to do this pregnancy, but that doesn't mean that have another one that it's going to be the same thing or like it varies. There's just so many factors when it comes to pregnancy. If there was one safe thing, then doctors wouldn't tell you, well, how do you feel? Like that's 90% of the thing they ask. How do you feel doing this? Because that's what matters.
I think that's a really healthy perspective. I also think I'm curious, like there's a lot of not misinformation, but when it comes to rolling during while pregnant, right? You'll see a lot of either men that don't know anything about pregnancy giving advice or people that just say, "Oh, you should never do that. That's crazy." People that don't know anything about jiu-jitsu. Where did this, I think you have a super healthy perspective on it of just like, I know I'm going to do what I am most comfortable doing. Where does that come from? Or did you talk to anybody? Do you have any other previous experiences with other women, anything like that? Like, because, with our process, I found it was difficult to find like reliable information of just like, is this
Yeah.
okay to do? Is this okay to roll while pregnant?
I mean, I did a lot of research, and the biggest thing that like when you talk to people, if you look at like the cold hard facts, if you're gonna look at it, biggest worry is one, pressure on the baby, but also if you think about it, there's a ton of amniotic fluid, and until you're in like the second trimester, the baby's actually in your pelvis. The baby's so low that it would actually be hard to hit the baby while training. However, the one of the biggest things that I found that the concern is impact, like you falling. It's not actually pressure on like mom or on baby before the second trimester as much as it is impact. And that's because of the placenta. It's not even actually the baby. It's because the placenta can split from the uterine wall. And then obviously if the placenta comes off, then you have issues because that's what's feeding the baby and everything like that. So I kind of, instead of trying to look at like people's necessarily opinions, because there are opinions on like this can cause this, but I wanted to see what are the actual issues, and then I can go into like what I feel comfortable within that. And the biggest thing that I found was again like that straight up heavy impact. You're worried about the placenta splitting. And so for me, that was a big thing that I was like, hey, like if I'm getting swept, like I want to make sure that I'm falling nicely as much as you can. I kind of tried to cut out takedowns early on, which again was hard because people didn't know. So sometimes I was still doing takedowns. But I would kind of partner with my husband because he knew, and I'd be like, we'll go over here. Um, or I would just pull guard right off the bat if we were starting standing. But that was for me the biggest concern that I found that you have to worry about if you're going to be training while pregnant, and that's the whole time.
And you said you knew even before you had kids that you wanted to roll during pregnancy. Is that just so you could come back to competition quicker? Is it for your mental health? Kind of what is your main motivation there?
Honest, all of the above. Like I've always been super active. I've been in sports or athletics since I could walk pretty much. Um, I don't think I would be able to handle that long of not training. Like mentally, I really don't think I would be able to. And then also there's the like if I'm used to being active and I'm not, I feel like it's gonna make labor harder. It's gonna make the pregnancy itself harder. I have hyperligament laxity anyway, so my joints are super loose. And I know if I quit lifting even for like a couple weeks, I start to feel it. And I was like, I can't imagine if I'm going through pregnancy when I already have super loose ligaments and then you have relaxin on top of it, which makes them even looser. Like my ligaments don't do their job as it is. It's my muscle that keeps everything in. So I'm like, I have to stay physically active for that aspect. And then also like the mental side of it, like I wouldn't be okay. I would just be sitting at home, maybe going to lift, and but like I would be miserable. And I didn't want pregnancy to be a miserable thing. Like I'm already not able to compete. I want to be able to be happy and look at it with positivity, like looking back that it's a good thing. And so for me, like I knew I wanted to train through it. And also, whenever I was injured, I always went into the gym. Even when I couldn't do anything, I was always there for the classes. I always kind of kept like the routine because for me personally, I feel like that makes it easier, especially a lot of what people go to jiu-jitsu for, people like that community, right? And a lot of times when people get hurt or if you get pregnant or something like that, if they don't feel comfortable still training, they just completely dip out. And I feel like that also kind of affects people's mental side a little bit more because you go from not only training and being active, but having this whole community, and then you have like nothing.
Yeah, and I think, happy, healthy mom, happy, healthy baby. So I think that makes a ton of
Exactly.
sense. I guess what I know you're very big on like I'm not a doctor, I'm not giving you advice, this is what works for me. But what would you say to a woman who wants to continue training through pregnancy, but she doesn't maybe know how to approach it? What kind of tips would you give her or advice?
Honestly, like for me, if you feel comfortable still trying to train, I would keep trying to train as normal as possible. If something doesn't feel right, then either I would stop doing it, but look it up because the thing is, there might be something that's a little bit uncomfortable, like you have your wife's been pregnant, you know how to, when the ligament starts stretching, it's very uncomfortable and it can feel like something's wrong when that's happening, but it's really just the ligament stretching. The first time I felt ligament pain, I was training and I was like, oh my God, I killed my baby. Like that's it. I something bad happened and I went and I looked it up and I asked my midwife. She's like, no, that's just like that's ligament pain. And I looked it up and I was like right at 14 weeks. And it's super normal for right at 14 weeks because everything's stretching. It's the first time stretching. So like if something doesn't feel right, just stop, look it up. It could be something normal or it could be something that maybe you need to make adjustments on. And I think the biggest thing is just be comfortable with making adjustments throughout the whole thing. Some days you're going to be able to do something and the next day you can't, and then the day after that you can do it again. Like that was the weirdest thing for pregnancy with me is like one day I could do something and then the next day my body didn't want to do it, but then the day after that my body would do it again. And so like I just didn't force it to do anything. And like sometimes certain movements, like that movement just isn't happening today. And that's what I knew. And then I would have to make adjustments off of that.
Um, So then you have the baby late August, right? How soon postpartum were you back on the mats?
So I was back training at 2 weeks, which is super early. I I've had a ton of people say that it was too early, but I felt good back training. I surprised myself being able to train at 2 weeks. I knew I was going to try to train at 2 weeks, but honestly, I went in being like, I'm going to have to take at least another week after this. But I was like, I'll go try. We'll see how my body does. Sometimes you feel better after movement, and that's what I knew. So I was like, well, I'll try it. If I don't feel good, I'll take another week off, and then I'll try again that week. And kind of that was my mentality, that I would try like each Monday. And if it didn't feel good, I would just push it another week to give me more time to recover. And I went, tried it 2 weeks, and I was like, no, like I actually I felt really good. And I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna keep doing this, but I'm only gonna train. I didn't add in lifting yet because one of the bigger concerns, especially after being pregnant and everything, like your pelvic floor can be very weak. And internal pressure is gonna make that worse, obviously. But lifting actually, in my head anyway, I was like, lifting is gonna create way more internal pressure than training will, because lifting, I'm bracing, and I like to lift heavier, so it's going to put way more internal pressure. So I didn't go back to lifting until, again, still early, but I was a month. So I gave myself 2 weeks to train, see how my body felt with that, and I felt really good. And then I was like, okay, in a month I'm going to go back and lift if I feel good. If I don't feel good, again, I'll have the same mindset. I'll cut it for the week, and then I'll give myself another week and go back and train. But luckily, like, my body responded even better than I thought that it would, and so I was able to go back to both pretty early.
So then what have been kind of the biggest challenges of training like a professional athlete with a newborn? Is it the schedule stuff? Is it the physical stuff? Kind of what are the biggest obstacles so far?
I think, luckily, again, like, I say he's a good baby, but he'll still cry during training sometimes. And like, he'll have good days and bad days. Some days he'll be great and he'll literally sit in his bouncer almost the entire time. And I don't have to pick him up once. Or sometimes me and my husband are literally switching off every single roll. Like, sometimes he just wants to be held and he's being clingy that day. And so he'll do a round, and then we'll switch, and I'll go do a round and he'll be holding the baby. And both times we're both trying to put the baby to sleep so that then we can both go to train. And luckily, like, most of the time, that's very rare that he'll do that the entire training. But it still happens. So I think there's always that, like, I can't ever just train. Like, I'm always looking over at him, and same thing for my husband. Like, he's constantly always looking over to make sure that he's not crying in the middle of training. So I think it's just a little bit. It's very simple when you don't have a kid. Like, you just go, you train, and that's it. Same thing with competing. You go, you compete, and it's simple. There's just always another thing that you have to think about, and it's not impossible. It's just another thing that you have to add in, and another thing that you have to be thinking about while you're training.
Yeah, I love the I've been there. We do that still with the you do one round, we'll do two. We go to an open mat. I'll do 2 rounds, then she does 2 rounds, and
Yeah.
then switch back and forth. So um that's really fun. I guess another question is like similar to training during pregnancy. What advice would you give to somebody who's like I still have a baby, I'm still maybe recovering a bit from pregnancy, but I want to get back in the gym. I want to continue to make jiu-jitsu a big part of my life.
I mean, if you still want to make it a part of your life, I think just going and trying, because you can do a ton of research and find everything out, but it doesn't matter until you actually get in there. One thing that I would give advice is, if you're still in pregnancy or even afterwards, there the two big things that were my main concern were, like, abdominal separation physically, and then the pelvic floor. So if you do therapy for both of those, even you can even do it while pregnancy and kind of do like prehab, so that you don't have issues, because those are your two biggest issues with coming back physically. um is, prehab those or rehab them if you're afterwards, to make sure that everything's healthy going in, and then just take the baby and go in. Honestly, he does, for us personally, he does great in a bouncer, and that's what we did since I started training at 2 weeks. Put him in a bouncer because usually he'll sleep in that a little bit easier, can bounce him in it, and then that's what works best for us. I know a lot of people bring the baby in the car seat. I didn't want him sitting in a car seat that long, and honestly, I feel like babies get so fussy in car seats. So we did the bouncer, just take the bouncer in and have him there. We have him by the edge of the mat, and just go in and train. Like, there's only so much research you can do before you just kind of go in and try it. And then be patient with yourself, right? It's not an easy thing to do, but it's definitely possible.
I love it. We did the bouncer too. Transition to the pack and play once he got a little
Yeah,
bit more
yeah.
mobile. But yeah, no, it's I would echo that. We brought our son in the gym like basically as soon as mom felt comfortable
Yeah.
returning to training, and he just watched jiu-jitsu for a while. It was no problem. Um, so competition wise, are you planning on doing Nogi Worlds, I assume?
Yeah, I need to sign up for that. It's a good reminder. But yeah, I am planning on doing it.
Okay. And then like moving forward, like any big plans, goals, things like that you want to do in 2025? Are you fully just back on the circuit now?
Yeah, that's pretty much the plan, just fully back on the circuit. Again, like I said, being a parent, it's a little bit more like if I go out of country now, I have to worry about like bringing him with me. But the plan is to just be fully back on the circuit, and then he'll just have to tag along with me.
What a life to live. Um, I want to switch gears here for these last few questions. I usually like to talk about technique a little bit. Um, so I want to ask you, you got what, four submissions, 4 out of 5 matches were submissions at
Yeah.
Nogi Pans.
Yep.
One thing that's really interesting, I think, about your game, obviously you can do everything, pass guard, take backs, things like that, but on paper it's the leg locks that gets everybody. I wonder what your advice is for somebody who's maybe getting good at leg locks, but I think a lot of people experience this. Once people know their opponent is good at leg locks, they're very defensive. Obviously, everybody, all of your opponents know you're a really dangerous leg locker. I'm sure they invest a lot of energy into just getting out of entanglements. So, what are your tips for like, even if somebody knows you want to leg lock them, how to get to that spot?
I think if you just attack, even though like as again on paper you see I hit like a ton of leg locks. If you only attack legs, it's so easy to defend. It's the same thing like if you're only attacking the neck, somebody's gonna leave their arm out there, but if you're never attacking it, they don't really have to worry about it. For me personally, if I know somebody's like super defending their legs, I just start attacking the upper body. And usually to defend the upper body, you have to make space, which leaves the legs open. But it's kind of one of those things that I'm like, hey, if I'm let's say I'm fighting the same person twice, if I leg lock them the first time, I assume they're gonna get super heavy, but then it usually that'll leave the neck out, which I would personally go after. It can leave the arm out as well, but usually the neck. So I would work on usually attacking like higher and then lower and going back and forth because if you just sit and just throw leg locks, it can be really easy to just defend that, right? Because I don't have to worry about anything else if you're only attacking the leg locks. It's kind of the same mindset that like you're supposed to chain things together when you're passing. You don't just do one pass. Even if there's one pass that you want, you still have another pass that you'll do, even if that's not the one that you usually hit. If you only focus on one thing, you're usually not going to get it. So my advice usually would be attacking upper and lower. I think it's very easy for people to kind of get in the mindset. They're like, oh, legs are easy. And then they only just go after legs. And then all of a sudden nothing's working. And it's because you're only attacking the legs. So I was like, go upper and lower. And then one will open up for the other.
That makes a ton of sense. I feel like you have a pretty nasty guillotine that I probably
Yeah.
gets people to posture out of a lot. That makes sense.
Yep.
And then other technique question is, I think you were in a couple like kind of 50-50 battles at Nogi Pans. You have a good 50-50 game. And I think that's a really interesting position. So I'm curious, like if you were going to teach a class on 50-50, where would you start of like, these are how you need to be defensively aware. These are the positions you should be looking for. How would you approach 50-50?
What's funny is I'll be the first one to say I hate 50-50, but I always play 50-50. I'm that person in class who's like, "Oh, you play a lot of 50-50." I'm like, "It's the worst guard ever." Um, Honestly, it's super easy to get into 50-50 for the fact that I think people feel very comfortable in it because it's 50-50. You have to always be conscious of your feet when you're in there. It's not something that you can just like forget about your feet and then start to attack. So if you're a nogi, I like the heel hook from there, from just the actual 50-50. If you actually watch nogi pans, most of them that I got, I think were from actually the outside. So I went from 50-50 and then transitioned it to the outside. You have to be careful doing that, that they're not hitting you in the leg drag. So if you notice when I go, I either have my feet already on the hips or I actually bring my feet across like I'm almost reaping, but not quite yet. And then I bring the foot over and then I'll fully finish the reap to make sure that they're not able to hit the leg drag. And those are the two that I really like. And then you also have the toe hold when you pull the leg to the opposite side from the 50-50. And then the straight ankle locks, there's pretty nasty from actual 50-50. That's probably the one that I would teach the most just because everybody can do it. is the one you'll go feet on the hips, put the knee down, and then you have a really nasty straight ankle from 50-50.
I do like that move. Well, I think that was all I had for you today. Again, I really appreciate it. It was fun to talk to you. Congrats on Nogi Pans. Congrats on the beautiful baby.
Thank you.
Of course.
You.
Sign up for Nogi Worlds. I was about to say catch her at Nogi Worlds. Let's make sure she signs up. Please sign up so we can watch her compete. Thanks again.